This is actually the second of 2 meetings. We held an in-person meeting last night in Culver City that was very well attended, gave us lots of things to think about. Before we get into the details of the meeting, I'd like to give you all just an idea of what to expect as far as the structure of our meeting and to introduce our staff. So to that end, I'm Ken Stroud. I'm Chief of the Community Air Monitoring Branch at the California Air Resources Board, CARB. I have 30 years experience in air monitoring and laboratory analyses. So tonight we have about 20 slides at the beginning to kind of run through what we're doing with regard to air monitoring in the community and what we have planned going forward. After those first 20 slides, we're going to pause for Q&A. Although you're encouraged to ask questions as we go, you can raise your hand, you could type questions in the chat, whatever you prefer. So we'll pause for Q&A after 20 slides, and then we'll follow that with a 10-minute break. And then we'll come back, reconvene, and we'll go through a couple demonstrations, a demonstration of our data dashboard, real-time data dashboard, and our odor reporting application. So after that, we'll come back. We'll have one more opportunity for Q&A. We can also open the room if anybody would like to address the broader group. We could do that. So I'd like to start the introductions by introducing the members of the monitoring team that are here tonight. So I'll start with Dr. Yunliang Zhao. Yunliang is an expert in air monitoring and atmospheric chemistry. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Chris Jacober. Chris is an expert in analytical and environmental chemistry. And I'd also like to introduce Dr. David Ridley. Dave is an expert in atmospheric data science, and is also manager of the advanced monitoring techniques section. So to continue introductions, I'll pass the mic to my colleague, Carolyn.
Hi, everyone. Really nice to see you all here to listen about the SNAPS program tonight, and really anxious to hear all of your input and questions upcoming. So please feel free to ask anytime tonight. My name is Carolyn Lozo. I'm Chief of the Oil and Gas Branch at the Air Resources Board. And my team in my branch that works on the SNAPS program really works hand in hand with Ken's team over at the laboratory division. And we help support with the public engagement piece of the study, some data analysis, and just keep the program moving along. So I'd like to introduce on my team, Kathleen Kazawa. There she is. She's a manager on my team, and she's been involved with the SNAPS program for many years in many aspects of the SNAPS program. But I'd also like to introduce Jonathan Blufer, who will be starting the presentation in just a couple of minutes. And he is really our community engagement expert. But I also do not want to forget Heather Bolstad, who is not on my team. She's in another agency. She's in the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. And Heather really helps out with the health analysis and the health portion of this study, estimating what the potential health impacts might be. So again, glad to see you all here tonight. Welcome, and looking forward to your input. So with that, Jonathan, would you like to start the presentation?
Of course. All right, can everyone see the slides?
Yes, we can.
All right, so glad to see so many folks here. We're excited to start our monitoring near the Inglewood oil field. I did want to start with an orientation for Zoom and just make sure that everyone is aware of the controls that are here tonight. So in terms of muting and unmuting yourself, you will not be able to unmute yourself until we ask you to. At that point, though, you'll be able to click unmute, and that's the bottom left of your screen. Everyone is allowed to be on video today, and we encourage that. So if you would like to be on video, please click the Start Video button on the bottom, whatever you are comfortable with. And if you have any questions throughout this presentation, again, we do encourage active participation, not just a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So at any point, based on what you're seeing in the slides, if you have any questions, comments, recommendations, you can use the raise hand feature. And to do that, depending on the version of Zoom you're using, you might just see the raise hand feature, or you click participants, and then you can click raise hand. And at that point, Carolyn and Kathleen will be managing the raise hands, and we'll call on you. We do have chat enabled for this meeting as well. And so the chat icon should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You should be able to message private chats as well. Just be aware that the private chats are archived, as is the chat that goes to everyone. I do also want to point out, as you can see here, that we do have the slides, both English and Spanish at the same time. And so there might be a couple slides where the text is a little small and harder to read. We do have on our website links posted for both the English and the Spanish version separately. So if you want to follow along on those slides as well for a little bigger text and images, please go ahead, and we'll have someone share those in the chat soon. So just to go over the agenda for today, especially for those that have not attended our meetings in the past, I do want to go over a brief overview of the SNAPS program, and then go into some more of the details about what we'll be doing with our monitoring near the Inglewood oil fields, so both our stationary and our mobile monitoring. And then we'll go into how we plan to communicate our results, and then we'll wrap up with some timeline and next steps. As was mentioned earlier, we'll also have a demonstration of our online data dashboard and our odor reporting tool as well after a 10-minute break. So the study of neighborhood air near petroleum sources, or the SNAPS program, its goal is to characterize air quality in communities close to oil and gas production and extraction facilities. But we are looking to assess the potential cumulative air quality impacts from all surrounding sources. So yes, oil and gas sources, but also any other sources that could be in the area, so including mobile sources as well. And you can see on the slide here on the right is actually one of our air monitoring trailers at one of our stationary monitoring sites, Marycrest Manor. There are three main goals to the SNAPS program. The first is to characterize air quality in communities near oil and gas operations. And then second, we do plan to identify the emission sources as possible, and we'll go into a little more detail on that later. And then third, we are working with our sister agency, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA. We'll be using our data and analyzing it for potential health risks to the community. So this is a very comprehensive air monitoring study with a whole lot more data than you would see at a typical air quality regulatory monitoring site. So the trailers can monitor for over 200 pollutants. Some of those include toxic air contaminants or TACs, as well as several criteria pollutants. So those include particulate matter, specifically PM 2.5, carbon monoxide, and ozone. We'll also be measuring for a suite of speciated volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, as well as methane, hydrogen sulfide, and metals. I do want to point out that methane, we are monitoring for it because it can be indicative of potential emissions from oil and gas operations and because of its climate change impacts, but it does not have any health impacts at levels that you would typically see in ambient air. Now to get to more of the specific details about our stationary and mobile monitoring. So there are two main types of measurements that our lab staff take on site. So first are the on-site measurements, and you can see an image here on the left that shows some of this instrumentation. So this instrumentation measures continuously, and so measurements are recorded every second or minute, and it is fast response, so these measurements are reported hourly. So some of these compounds that are measured this way are posted on our website in near real time, and I'll go over that in a little more detail soon. But these do include methane, hydrogen sulfide, ozone, carbon monoxide, PM2.5, and black carbon. And then on-site measurements also measure for some of those volatile organic compounds as well as metals. We'll also be monitoring for some meteorological data, and so that includes wind speed and direction, as well as temperature. Another way that we will be taking measurements are discrete measurements, and so these require lab analysis, so they are sent to a lab, and it takes a little more time for some quality assurance and quality control of the data. These are taken as 24-hour average samples. They're taken over a day, and they are collected every 6 to 12 days. And these compounds include aldehydes, polycyclic aromatic compounds, or PAHs, as well as sulfur-containing compounds. So some more details on the stationary monitoring sites themselves. So we went through a process with the community a few years ago to determine 2 stationary monitoring sites that would adequately measure potential emissions from the oil field, also give us a good idea of what the communities are being exposed to. And so we do have 2 sites. They are currently set up right now. And so one is on the eastern edge of the oil field near Kenneth Hahn State Recreation Area. So it's directly adjacent to that. And we're calling that the Sentinel Peak Resources Site. And then we have a second site as well, just west of the oil field in Culver City at a skilled nursing facility, Mary Crest Manor. And you can see that with the yellow star on the left. Unfortunately, our lease is ending at the Mary Crest Manor site. So at this point, we are looking to move that site in a few months to another site that was also a community recommendation, very close by on the west of the oil field, West LA College. The positive about this is that we had promised 12 months of continuous data for the community, and now we're going to have more than 12 months. So the 12 months won't officially start until we start monitoring at the backup site, which we do anticipate to be West LA College. We are currently negotiating the lease at that site right now. And as I detailed on the last slide, the equipment is housed in climate-controlled trailers where the on-site measurements, discrete samples, and meteorological data are collected. So in addition to the stationary monitoring, it is also supplemented by some mobile monitoring. These instruments are housed within a vehicle. You can actually see the vehicle on the image here on the right. This was taken back last September. And this vehicle, the instruments in it can measure for methane, ethane, black carbon, ozone, and hydrogen sulfide, and those are measured continuously. And in addition to that, benzene, toluene, and xylenes are measured every 15 to 30 minutes. This monitoring occurs along public roadways and communities around the Inglewood oil field. And so, we are trying to capture, as many areas around the oil field as we can. But I do want to point out that these measurements really are just a snapshot in time. And so they might not indicate, what the average concentrations are in that location all the time. It's really giving us an idea of what might be happening just at that time when the mobile monitor is in that area. But our staff do multiple passes on streets, so that if they do detect high concentrations of certain pollutants, they will absolutely investigate that further. And just a few more details on the mobile monitoring itself. So it is periodic. We plan to do mobile monitoring 2 weeks per quarter with about 6 hours per day and at least 3 days per week of this monitoring. This will occur at various times of day. So we have heard from the community that, a lot of the odor The strongest odors they experience do tend to be overnight into the early mornings. So we absolutely plan to do some mobile monitoring in these early morning hours, but also other hours of the day and different days of the week. Preliminary locations that we do want to look at with the mobile monitoring vehicle were taken from a health risk assessment performed by MRS, that a contractor with the county of LA. They did a health risk assessment back in 2019. And so based on the sites that were in there, you can see on the map on the left some of the locations that we plan to take the mobile monitor. But there will be mobile monitoring that also occurs, between all these locations. So measurements will be taken there as well. In addition to that, we heard last year when we released our draft air monitoring plan that some residents want more sites east of the oil field. And so we heard that, and we absolutely plan to add some more sites there as well. So what you see on this map is not final. We're absolutely flexible with it and can, add more sites. And something that is new and exciting for SNAPS. So last year when we released our air monitoring plan, we also received some recommendations from the community that they want to be a little more involved with the science itself. And so we are in the process of acquiring a limited number of lower cost sensors for deployment with residents in neighborhoods near the oil field. And so you can see the sensors here on the right. And so it'll be about 10 of each kind of sensor. And so that includes total VOC sensors, as well as meteorological sensors. And those we do expect to have soon. And then there'll be some time to do some quality control checks of the instrumentation. But at that point, we do hope to host a meeting and do some demonstrations to show, for those that want to participate, how to use these sensors, replace filters, things like that. We are also in the process of acquiring some sensors that monitor for black carbon, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, nitric oxide, and nitrogen dioxide. I know we don't really have a timeline for when we will get those sensors. Those might be a little later on, but we are working on that as well. So, this really is just the beginning of the process. This is new for us as well. But, of course, we would love to see folks get involved. So, you can let us know today in the chat if you would like to participate in this. Also, please email us at snaps@arb.ca.gov if you're interested in volunteering to host one of these. I just want to check, Carolyn and Kathleen, if there are any questions at this point.
We do have a question, Jonathan, and it's a great question. I'll read it from the chat. And Justin asks, what safeguards are the state and city using and considering to ensure the fossil fuel businesses will pay for environmental harm and capping the wells safely? We do not want to see another pollute and file bankruptcy like the Exide battery recycling plant in LA. And yes, we absolutely don't want to. Justin, I think what I would say on the state level, I can't speak to the city level, but on the state level, for anything that's subsurface, anything that's underground, that is under the authority and regulation of CalGEM. You may be aware of the state agency, CalGEM, California Geological Energy Management Division. And so they do all of the permitting of subsurface wells. And they are also currently, and so I would also say that they collect fees from operators. So those permits, through that permit process, CalGEM pulls fees and collects fees from operators. Some of those fees can go towards capping wells if there are operators that have abandoned their wells, because that does happen sometimes in the state. So that's what can be covered there. But I would also mention, you may not be aware, a couple of things. Currently, CARB is doing a study. We're have started it recently to measure emissions from abandoned wells and orphaned wells. So we're trying to get a better handle on what might be coming from those wells. But also CalGEM, like I say, their primary authority for anything that's subsurface, they have a full program in place where they are prioritizing what wells in the state do need to be plugged or replugged. And they're working on that process right now. If you want more information on that particular process, you might look up something that's called the Methane Task Force. And that is an effort between CalGEM and CARB and others. But you can get a lot of information. There are meetings that the task force has as well, and there's a lot of explanation there on what's happening generally with enforcement of wells across the state. But this is one particular place where there's a lot of conversation. So you might want to plug in to that. That's the only question that I see right now. Kathleen, do you see any others?
Yeah, we just got a question in from Beverly, who joined us a little late. But she says, great that the monitoring will be on the oil industry. Any chance pesticides and other toxic chemicals will be monitored from Big Ag? And so I think, Jonathan, maybe you could just go over what the major components will be monitoring for are. Maybe we can go back to that slide really quickly.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so thank you for that question, Beverly. So I don't believe we are monitoring for any pesticides specifically, but we are measuring for a suite of compounds that consider toxic air contaminants. And so we are looking into a lot of toxics with the study, as well as some volatile organic compounds that could have health effects as well. And so, yeah, that's absolutely something we're looking into. And our sister agency, OEHA, will be, analyzing these data for potential health risks associated with these pollutants and the concentrations that we do detect.
Hey, Jonathan, I might be able to add. I'm going to ask a question of Yun Liang, but I think our GC mass spectrometers might be able to pick up a couple of volatile pesticides if they were present in the air. And I'm specifically asking about methyl bromide and 1,3-D dichloropropene. Yun Liang.
Yeah, this is Yun Liang. Yeah, our GC is able to measure 1,3-D PD, but for the methyl bromide, our online GC is unable to do it. Come a little bit too volatile for the online GC.
So yes for 1,3-D, but no for methyl bromide?
Currently.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and that's all the questions I see so far, and no hands are raised. Thanks, Jonathan.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. All right, and so now I'm going to move into the next section, and we're going to discuss how we plan to communicate results to the community. And so here, I do want to go over, as I mentioned in a previous slide, we will have concentrations of some of our pollutants, so 6 of them, streamed in near real time on our website. And so these are methane, hydrogen sulfide, ozone, carbon monoxide, PM 2.5, and black carbon. And this is an hourly time resolution. I don't want to go into too much detail on the data display itself, since we will be doing a demo of that later on in this presentation, but there are a couple of screenshots here on the right that give you some idea of, time series that you could find on the online data display, and also some comparisons to some ambient air quality standards for a few of these pollutants as well. This data display actually went live yesterday, and so we are, officially collecting data and do have that streaming for our 2 monitoring sites right now. If you go onto the SNAPS website, and you can just find that by Googling CARB SNAPS and then clicking the link on the left that says data display, you can access it there. For any subsequent analysis for the other pollutants that we'll be measuring for, including toxic air contaminants and the VOCs and metals, We will be providing updates to the community on these as available, which I'll go into a little more detail in the next couple of slides, as well as a more cumulative analysis that we'll be doing after we complete monitoring. So, we've heard from the community that, we should be more transparent with our data analysis and, getting more of the analysis out earlier. So we absolutely do plan to do that for the study. So there will be quarterly updates that we plan to post to the SNAPS website. And so these will include progress updates for what, has been going on over the last quarter. And then also, as feasible, any sort of preliminary data analysis. And so, I do want to emphasize this data analysis would be preliminary, using some of the data that's been collected so far. We're not sure exactly what's going to be in these quarterly updates, since this is new for us as well. But, we are happy to take any recommendations for what you all would want to see in these. But for right now, at the very least, we're thinking these progress updates, as well as comparisons to health-based thresholds and air quality standards for some of the pollutants, as well as some general statistics. So, average and maybe maximum concentrations observed during a specific quarter. I do want to point out that there will be a lag in this data analysis, since it does take at least a few months to quality control the data. And so, for instance, the first quarterly update will probably be a little more limited in the data analysis, and will include more of these progress updates and, maybe some data analysis of those 6 pollutants that are streaming on our website. After that point, there will be a lag of about a quarter in the analysis. So, for instance, the second quarterly update, we expect to have data analysis for the first quarter of data. For the third quarterly update, we'll have analysis from the second quarter of data, and so on. And also, we do plan to have a mid-monitoring meeting. And so this will probably take place about halfway into monitoring. And like our current format, we anticipate at this point to probably have an in-person and a virtual meeting. At this point, I would say, this could be late fall of this year, but more likely, I'd say, winter of 2023 into 2024. And this will include, similar information as the quarterly updates above. And, we hope to have some great open discussions on how, we can improve on how we're communicating data at those. So, beyond these quarterly updates, as we said, that would be a lot more preliminary data analysis. We, of course, plan to do some subsequent data analysis once the monitoring is complete on, more of a cumulative analysis. And so you'll see a lot more data analysis there, including things like trends in the data, so temporal trends, hourly, daily, monthly, seasonal trends, and the concentrations of pollutants that were measured. Like in the quarterly updates, some general statistics, and probably, more detailed statistics than we had on these quarterly updates as well. As appropriate, also case studies. So, for instance, if we saw a whole suite of pollutants spike to their maximum concentrations over the whole year of monitoring at the same time, we would want to look into that further and do a case study about, why that might have been the case. We do plan to do comparisons to regional data, for pollutants that are measured, in similar ways as SNAPS. There are some pollutants that we are monitoring for that aren't monitored by any other studies. And so those, we would not be able to have those comparisons. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we are contracting out a source apportionment analysis. And so this will give some indication through positive matrix factorization, which is an EPA model, where these pollutants might be originating from. And so this gives an idea of what the source categories are. So, are the pollutants likely originating from oil and gas related sources, or are some of them originating more from mobile sources, or, some other potential sources in the area? And so this wouldn't necessarily point to a specific source, say on the oil field or off the oil field, but just give an idea of if it was probably, oil field related or mobile source related. And we are working with our sister agency, OWIHA, who will do a very detailed health risk assessment to look into, potential health risk associated with the pollutants that we are measuring for. And so they will be comparing both short and longer term exposure levels to health-based guidance values. And so they will be looking at both non-cancer health risk, and so they'll compare to acute, so short-term, and chronic, which is longer-term, health guidance values, such as reference exposure levels. They will also be analyzing for potential cancer risk from the pollutants that are measured and using cancer potency values. And then for the criteria pollutants, they will also be looking at national California ambient air quality standards, so comparing concentrations to those. And so with all of that, I just want to provide, one example of the type of data analysis that could be included in, things like the mid-monitoring meeting or the cumulative analysis again. Again, I want to emphasize this is just one example. So we'll also include, things like tables that show what the concentrations were of pollutants and, time series to show concentrations over the time we were there. But here's another type of analysis called a heat map that we did show to our previous community, Lost Hills, at their mid-monitoring meeting. And so this was using preliminary data from the first few months of monitoring. So I believe that was May through either July or August when we were there. And you can see on the horizontal axis there, it shows the time of day. So from midnight on the left to 11 p.m. on the right. And then on the vertical axis on the left, you can see the types of pollutants that were measured. And then each box that has a corresponding color that gives some indication of, at that time of day, if you were over those few months of data where you're tending to see above average concentrations of those pollutants compared to their average concentration. You can see that in the brighter yellow colors, or you're seeing concentrations that were below their average, and you can see those in the darker colors. And so you can see here at the top that the highest average concentrations of hydrocarbons, BTEX, and methane tended to be in the early morning. The higher black carbon and carbon monoxide concentrations tended to be in the morning and evening, as that could potentially be indicative of mobile sources and traffic. And then particulate matter, or PM2.5, was typically highest during the evening, and that tended to be when winds were at their strongest, so potentially dust being picked up and traversing through town. And something that is somewhat new, but also what we had in Lost Hills, we do want to hear from you and be able to work with you on anything that might help us in what we're doing. And so we do have an odor reporting tool where residents can report any sort of air quality or odor complaint that they might be experiencing. And this can help inform our mobile monitoring timing and locations, and also might help in some of our data analysis as well. I do want to point out, again, this is not for enforcement purposes. And so if you do require any immediate action based on this, please contact the South Coast Air Quality Management District at 1-800-CUT-SMOG. We also received a recommendation last night, and we'll be adding that to our tool as well. There's a phone line that the operator handles as well if you want any more immediate action. And so here we have the online tool, and you can scan the QR code or use this link. We also have a flyer on our website where you can find out how to access this tool. We'll be doing a demo of it fairly soon as well. And so that might help answer any of your questions on that. But there's a screenshot on the right here that gives some indication of what to include. That could include location where you experienced the odor, time when you started experiencing the odor, some additional information. So if you know the wind direction, that might be helpful for us. And then also the type and strength of odor. Okay. Before we move into the break, I know there's a lot of information, so I wanted to see if there were any questions from the audience right now.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Let me mention just a couple of comments and questions that we got in the chat. First of all, Beverly, I want to thank you for the information that you've provided about some issues that you think, some impacts that you think might be happening in the Salinas area from pesticides. So thank you for providing that information. That's really helpful to us. And then Colby is giving us some support. Thank you, Colby, and has a question about if we have chosen a source apportionment contractor yet. And I think our MLD folks can answer that one.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Yeah, so a contractor has been selected for the source apportionment.
Okay, and then there's one other question, comment from Amara. Will you please review how the geographic location for this study was selected? Also, do you have demographic data for the area? So I'm going to put in the chat, Amara, a link to our community selection document, which kind of outlines how we selected the first 4 communities for monitoring. And so, Jonathan, you might have to remind us, though, if demographic data was actually used.
Yes, thank you. So yes, it was. So the Callum virus screen tool, back, we had decided these communities at that time. It was the 3.0 version, and we used that as one of our indicators to help us in deciding which communities to go to. So those that we're above the 75th percentile, and that has to do with pollution and some demographic data as well. We did use that in our community selection process. And then I don't know if also would help Kathleen to share maybe the site selection process as well. That's on our website, since that also gives some indication for the specific locations of our air monitors and how we decided on those.
Right. I'll definitely get that link up in the chat. I also see that Laura has her hand raised. Let me get to you, Laura. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to ask you to unmute, and then you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question or tell your comment.
I was looking at the carb pollution mapping tool, and I saw a high amount of benzene, 103 pounds emitted in 2020. Is that like from the Sentinel Peak Resources LA Basin oil and gas production facility? And I also saw like a huge amount of methane, 16,000, a little over 16,000 metric tons of methane emitted. Were they captured or put in storage or actually leaking to the atmosphere? That was the question I had. I didn't understand what exactly you were reporting there. I didn't read it carefully. This carb mapping pollution tool data, that was from the year 2020. And the benzene was 103 pounds, and the formaldehyde was 38.3 pounds emitted.
Thanks, Laura, for your question. I think we're going to have to look at that a little more closely and get back to you on it. We don't have anybody online at this point that has any experience or expertise on the mapping tool. So we do have your information, and if it's okay to get back to you, we can certainly do that. Is that okay?
Also, can you please send me the link to the live data that your van is measuring, if I can get it, and look the van's measuring, and tell me when the van is going to go out and measure so I can look at it at the right time.
So the mobile monitoring data, which I think you are referring to, I'm going to defer that question to Dave or Ken to talk about that, but I do not believe it's going to be posted in real time, but we can certainly talk about when we'll be down measuring in the area.
Yeah, this is Ken. Yes, that's correct. The real time, the mobile monitoring, we don't have the ability to stream that to the website And so what we are planning to do is every time we go out, we'll do whatever it is, 4 hours, 5 hours. I don't know exactly how long mobile monitoring will, I don't recall how long that will go. But at the end of each day, we would create like a heat map of where we have been and the measurements that we made. And we'd be able to post that probably by the next day, so that that would be available to the community. And then once we complete, our planned amount of mobile monitoring runs, we'd be able to kind of dive in and do a full analysis of the data, and that would be shared as well.
Thanks. Send me the link anyway.
Yeah, we can do that.
Thanks.
And that's all the, that's all the hands I see. Oh, here we go. Jesus, I'm going to ask you to unmute. You can go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. I have a question similar to one I saw just right now on the chat. If and I'm on behalf of residents from the Lost Hills community, is there a set date for when the results from the Lost Hills monitoring? Yeah, is there a set date for Lost Hills monitoring?
Yeah. Hi, Jesus. Thanks for joining us tonight. Glad to get the question. As you know, the Lost Hills report is not out yet. And I would just start by saying that the SNAPS team wants the community of Lost Hills to have that report as soon as possible. We're really proud about the effort that was made for that community. And we are really looking forward to being able to post it and provide that information to the community. I think you are well aware, and many people are well aware of the size of the data, how much information we collected in Lost Hills. It's really very unprecedented. And so to pull all that information in was really a huge effort between multiple agencies at CARB. Multiple divisions within CARB, and then also multiple agencies. It really was a monumental effort. And then in addition to that analysis, to put it into a format that could be understood by the community, could be understood by the public, was, again, a very monumental effort. And we tried to put it into several different formats. Obviously, the data set itself and all of the explanation of how we came to the results, but also smaller explanations that would be, that folks could get their hands around a little bit more easily. So all of that was really a huge effort. We're still going through that process because we want to make sure that everyone involved with the analysis, the collection of the information, everyone has a really good understanding of what the results are, but also how we got to those results. That obviously takes a little bit of time to get through as well. Currently, the final report is with the governor's office for their review, for their understanding. And when we are given the okay to post it, like I said, we are all really looking forward to sharing that information, first and foremost with the Lost Hills community. We really owe that to you all. But just to share it publicly and start having those conversations about what the results say. So the final thing I want to say is that we really understand that everyone has been so patient through this process. Obviously, we had a pandemic in the middle of it all as well, but that's not an excuse to fall back on. We just really appreciate your continued patience as you wait for this report, but we're very anxious to get it out and start discussions with you about it. Thanks, Jesus.
Thank you. No, thank you. I definitely appreciate that. Who in the governor's office can we reach out to see if there's if we can have any impact on when it will come out?
Jesus, we have your contact information. I'll get that to you.
Thank you.
If that works. Yeah, you bet.
Okay, thanks, Jesus, for the question. Thanks, Carolyn. I do see, Laura, your hand is raised again. I just wanted to make sure. go ahead and ask your question. Nope. Okay, never mind. I think we are good on hands. And a couple of comments in the chat regarding pesticides as well. Thank you, Beverly. I think, Jonathan, we can go ahead and head to break at this time.
Yeah,
Oh,
great.
wait,
Thank
hold on.
you.
One sec. We do have one hand up. Trent, go ahead. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, I'm following up on Jesus's comments. I put in a question as to when we could anticipate a report from the Inglewood once we are done here, in light of it being 3 years and still waiting at Lost Hills. Can we anticipate a similar time frame, something shorter, something longer? Do we have a feel for that, please?
Great question, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Can you respond?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think, with what has happened with the Lost Hills report, we're not exactly sure how long that would take. And that's why we're trying to be a little more responsive, or hopefully a lot more responsive, about how we are getting preliminary data analysis out to the community. And so, we will have those quarterly updates. We will have the mid-monitoring meeting and, any sort of way that we can communicate data earlier. In terms of the cumulative analysis after we do finish monitoring, I don't think, we can provide a specific time at this point since we really don't know. But I guess to give some indication. So, if we officially start our year of monitoring this fall, once we're located at our backup site on the west side of the oil field, 1 year of monitoring would take us to fall of 2024. And then after that point, this is going to be a lot of data, even more data than Lost Hills, since we'll have 2 sites and more than 1 year of data. So I anticipate, it would take a while after that point, well into 2025 till we could even, consider releasing that cumulative analysis. But, we're going to try to get as much out as we can with these quarterly updates in the meantime.
Thanks, Trent, for your question, and my apologies. I think I just misread it the first time around, so I thought it was in just reference to Lost Hills, but thank you for that, and thanks, Jonathan. No other, oh, wait. Let's see. We have some comments come in the chat. I'm thinking maybe we can go to break, and then maybe we can try to address that in the chat, the other comments.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. So at this point, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll make sure to answer those questions in the chat that we can, if there are any that, we should address. After the break, we can do that as well. And then we'll also show our demo of the data display, as well as our odor reporting tool. And so at this point, it's 6:54, so we'll be on break until 7:04, and then we'll get started again. Thank you all. Everyone will be returning from break in 1 more minute.
Welcome back, everyone. So I'll get started here. We're going to give a little demo of some of the new tools that have been created for the SNAPS program in Inglewood Oilfield. And so the first thing that we want to share is the SNAPS odor logging tool, odor reporting tool. And I think there might be a link to this in the chat. Jonathan also showed a QR code on one of the previous slides, so you can use that to pick this up on your phone and get to this link. And it will also be linked to on the SNAPS website on the California Air Resources pages. So the first thing that we want to say about this is the purpose of this tool isn't for enforcement, and this maybe gets to one of Beverly's questions I saw in the chat. So the tool itself here isn't for enforcement. If you do want enforcement when it comes to something like odors, then the information on this page gives you the number that you should call. You should call South Coast AQMD, and then also based on some comments we got last night, we'll be adding the Inglewood Oilfield call a number on here as well. So we just want to make that clear that this is really for informational purposes, and the goal here is just really to be able to make it as easy as possible to report odors in a few clicks, so that we can gather this information, and then we can also kind of cross-reference this with wind direction, with pollutants that we're measuring at the two different SNAP sites, and distribute it over the network as over the region as well. So the idea here is that the more data that we can collect and the more information that we have, then the more useful this will be. So the more people are able to use this, if you can bookmark this tool, so you have it available on your phone, it should show well on your phone. That would be fantastic. And so I'll just do a quick walkthrough here of what's necessary to be able to report an odor here. And so a map will come up, and if you give it permission, it will then know your location. Depending on your privacy settings, it might do this automatically, and you can move around and change the location if it happens to not come up in the right place, or if you're reporting this later on than when you're actually discovering it. Then so that's one thing that has to be selected. Another thing that has to be selected here is a categorization of the odor. And so this is using the odor wheel. So these are formal categories for different types of odor. And there's also other at the bottom if you do want to kind of include some other details of what the odor smells like. And then the only other piece of information that is required is for you to rate kind of whether it's a mild smell, strong, unbearable. This may help us in being able to figure out whether you're very close to the source or whether it's maybe much further downwind. So that's really useful information for us for mapping back onto what potential pollutants you may be smelling, and also kind of how far away from the source you may be. And then one other thing which is automatically kind of populated with the current time that you open this form. This is the date and time that you smell the odor as well. So if you are reporting this later, if you can change this time to when you think you smelled the odor, that would be really helpful. Then you can provide us with any additional comments or observations on something you may have seen that could be the source, or weather conditions, wind direction, things like that. anything that might be helpful. And then if you like your name, email address, these aren't required, but just useful for us to keep track. And then the very last question is just asking informationally whether you intend to report this for enforcement. And this is just so the way we've set things up is we'll be able to share this data with South Coast AQMD, and to make sure that we can we know how many duplicates we're likely to find in there too. So that's just informational. And then if we submit this, oh, I didn't fill it out myself. There we go. So if you submit this, that will then register into our database, and then it reminds you here again what the phone number is if you do want to call and report this for enforcement, and then also a link to the form as well. So that's the odor reporting tool, and now I will move over to the data display. So we've created this data display to show the real-time pollutants, a subset of the real-time pollutants that we're measuring. And you can find this on the CARB website under the SNAPS pages. And I think Kathleen also dropped a link to this in the chat. If you scroll back up the chat, you should have access to this. And what I'm going to do, there's a button down here at the bottom corner, which opens it in a new window, and that just makes it a little bit bigger on the screen. Hopefully everyone can see that a little better now. And there are 5 pages on here. The first page shows a map of the region, and it shows a dot for sites in the area that are measuring PM2.5 and ozone. And what you're seeing here, you can select a date range, and this is showing 24-hour averages or longer if you choose a wider date range. And so currently this is showing PM2.5 at this selection of sites in South Coast. And you can see here we have the 2 SNAP sites, Marycrest Manor, and then at Sentinel Peak Resources as well. And on the left-hand side, you can see what the PM2.5 in this case is being measured at each of those sites. And if you click on a site, it will then select that site down here, so you can kind of compare to other sites in the area, and then similarly for ozone as well. And this is all being kind of pulled in real time. The dashboard is actually updated every 3 hours at the moment. This is showing kind of 24-hourly data from the previous day. But on the next panels I will show, we'll show kind of some of that hourly data that's coming in more frequently. And so the next one here is data that we have that's relevant to the air quality standards. So on this slide, there's some descriptive information at the top here, and we will kind of provide links for more information on the National Ambient Air Quality Standards and California Ambient Air Quality Standards here. But what we're showing is the different pollutants relative to the air quality standard on the time scale of that standard. So for example, for PM2.5, it's a 24-hour national ambient air quality standard. So this is PM2.5 at the Marycrest Manor site, averaged for 24-hour periods over 8 days. So you can see that relative to the standard. The same for ozone against the 8-hour standard, and then for carbon monoxide and hydrogen sulfide as well against the 8-hour and 1-hour standards. But there are bars here, but the concentration is very low relative to the standard right now. And then on this page, you can kind of toggle between the Sentinel Peak Resources, SNAP's monitoring site location, and the Marycrest Manor monitoring station. And then if we go into these next 3 panels, they all show, they all look very similar, and they're showing the time series of each of these pairs of pollutants here. And we've grouped these kind of PM and ozone being criteria pollutants, methane and H2S, that often associated with oil and gas operations, and CO and black carbon, which are often associated with traffic, but not always. So you can see these here, and you can see a time series of a week of data, hourly averaged data. We're getting some of these at higher time resolution than hourly. Some of these are coming in at minute time frequency, but we're averaging to hourly here. But you can see both sites at the same time. You can toggle those on and off as well if you want to focus on one or the other. We also show what the measurement detection limit is estimated to be for these. So you can see For example, in this case here, for PM 2.5, sometimes you will see negative values, and that's due to the uncertainty of the instrument. And so we just wanted to make sure that it was clear that the measurement detection limit is showing that anything below this is hard for us to distinguish from zero. Another feature, if you hover over the data, you'll be able to see the concentration for each of the two sites, and then also what the wind speed was and the wind direction at that point in time as well. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention here is the tables on the right-hand side show what the average concentration was over this week time period as a function of the wind direction. So kind of you can see here what the concentration was when the wind was coming from the east versus from the south, from the west, to kind of try and give some indication of whether the concentration is higher coming from one predominant wind direction versus another as well. And this is a kind of iterative process. It's a work in progress. So we're really interested to hear your thoughts, any features that you'd like to see, things that are maybe unclear and you'd like clarification on, and we will keep kind of developing this and keep trying to improve on it to be able to share this data. We're wanting to try and increase the time frequency so we can get you the data every hour. Currently, we can't do that with this the platform that we're using, but we're looking into ways of doing that. But as I say, currently this is updated every 3 hours. And that concludes the presentation of the odor reporting tool and the data display, and we're happy to take any questions on this.
So if you have any questions, you can please raise your hand, or also you can add it to the chat. Dave, I don't see any questions right now, or comments.
I just wanted to add, while we're waiting for any more questions to come up, there was some question about enforcement and if we were using this effort for enforcement. And just wanted to mention that oil and gas sources in California are regulated through CARB regulations and also through local air district regulations. And those regulations actually work hand in hand. But certainly depending on what we find through the SNAPS program at different locations throughout the state, that information could feed into those regulations and result in changes, maybe improvements to those regulations. So while we're not looking at direct enforcement, and this is really data collection and health impacts analysis through the study program or through the SNAPS program, we will certainly consider the information that we get and the results that we determine as something that could feed into regulations if that's necessary. So just wanted to add that to the conversation we have had already.
I've also, there is a question on source apportionment actually in the chat. So I want to go ahead and read that from Trent. Being a novice on pollution apportionment, could you please give a brief explanation on how the breakout of oil field pollutants from mobile sources would occur with the proximity to the 10 and 405 freeways, LAX, La Cienega Boulevard, bisecting the field with 15,000 cars a day? This seems to be a challenge. So I'll pass that on to Yun Liang.
Hi, this is Yun Liang. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. This source apportionment is really challenging for us to identify the major sources, in that area. And for us, we are monitoring the air pollutants through online monitoring and the discrete samples. And we're gonna use the EPA developed model to do the source apportionment. The model is positive matrix factorization, short, kind of like we can call it a PMF model. And the PMF, the capability of PMF to identify the major sources, two things depend on, whether the monitoring data is able to capture the emission patterns, obviously characteristics of emissions. For example, like traffic, whether our monitoring data is able to capture the rush hour emissions, weekday versus weekend difference, or seasonal difference. If we are able to capture all of them, and the emission pattern from traffic is different from oil and gas. The oil and gas probably is like relatively stable during weekday and weekend, and there's no like morning rush hour compared to traffic. Then the model we will use, like PMF, is able to separate them. Then this is first step, we're gonna separate the emission patterns. Then based on the tracers we are measuring, like for example, like a benzene, toluene, like carbon monoxide from combustions, benzene toluene ratio is gonna give us some information whether the benzene and toluene from oil and gas emissions or from traffic. And we also measure other tracers to help us to associate, different emission patterns to the actual sources. But we cannot really tell you sometimes based on the data, whether it's from Highway 10 or 405. That probably is a little bit difficult or challenging there. But we will try based on wind direction, to see how further we can go, to identify different sources. Generally speaking, we might just categorize all the traffic emissions together as traffic sources versus oil and gas, or versus other sources like a background, maybe from airport. And this is the approach we're gonna use to identify the major sources, our major source category. But one thing I want to add is like I mentioned, it's like it depends on the emission, the time resolution of our measurements. If the emission patterns, like two sources have similar emission patterns, we cannot really tell the difference between them. So that means we don't know exactly which one is the major one or which one is the primary contributor to the ambient pollution. But we will categorize them and provide some explanation there. Say it's like this is two sources together. We cannot tell them apart.
Thanks, Yin Liang. I also have another question from Charles that came in. Please expand on benzene or BTEX real-time data availability. So Dave, maybe I'll pass that to you.
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, so Charles, the benzene and BTEX is being measured in real time by the GCMS system, but that requires more data analysis and more QA/QC afterwards. And so that will be available when it comes to our kind of quarterly reports, along with the kind of discrete sample laboratory analyzed data when that becomes available. So that's when we'll be able to share that data. As for the real-time dashboard display, we can only really show the data that we're comfortable, doesn't require kind of data analysis and extra data analysis afterwards. We can do some quick quality assurance checks, and then we can display preliminary data on here for PM, ozone, methane, H2S, CO, and black carbon because of the instruments used there. But benzene is different to those.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks for your question, Charles. I don't see any additional questions or comments at this time.
Thank you all for your great questions. We just have a few more slides, and then we can answer any more questions that you all might have. All right. So I'm going to go to some timeline and next steps. And so just to orient us, back to what has been done so far in the community and what we will be doing. So we started our process back in 2019 and 2020 with 2 sets of community meetings really to work on where our 2 stationary monitoring sites would be located. And then, we've continued since then, securing the monitoring sites. We did release our draft air monitoring plan, which you can find on the SNAPS website last June. And we're also working to finalize the air monitoring plan with, any recommendations that we received since then to, really enhance, what can be in there in terms of data communication and things like that. And then we also work to finalize some contracts for the sites, such as temporary power to, power our equipment and security fencing and things like that. And then again, yesterday, our data display went live. And so we are, officially collecting data at the Sentinel Peak Resources site and the Marycrest Manor site. And then over our year plus of monitoring, we will be releasing those quarterly updates to try to get as much preliminary data analysis out to you all as we can. We will have that real-time data streaming on our website that Dave just showed you all. We will have some periodic mobile monitoring as well. And we do have that starting later this month. And then we'll also have that mid-monitoring meeting. And then beyond that point, again, we don't have a definitive timeline for these, but we will also be working with OWIHA on the health risk assessment, our contractor on the source apportionment analysis, and then on our end also working on any sort of cumulative analysis that we can. I did want to point just to some other efforts that might be of interest as well. So Carolyn mentioned earlier the methane task force. And so this is an effort, part of several agencies. So the California Environmental Protection Agency, CARB, the California Geologic Energy Management Division, or CalGEM, and also the California Natural Resources Agency, or CNRA. And this was formed last year under the direction of the governor to identify and address methane leaks from oil and gas infrastructure. And one of the key objectives with this task force is really to elevate opportunities for deeper public engagement. So really to, make sure that there's more transparency on what is being done in the oil and gas space for the state, and that, the community is really involved in that process. So currently, as part of the task force, they are working on some joint inspections across agencies of oil and gas operations. This is currently up in Kern County, but this absolutely could be expanded to other parts of the state. And if you all want to hear more about the methane task force, they do have quarterly meetings, and the next one is actually scheduled just a few weeks from today on June 27th. I do believe it's at 5:30 p.m. virtually, but maybe we can post a link in the chat to the methane task force page. And then Carolyn also has, touched on some of the regulations as well. And so our oil and gas methane regulation at CARB was adopted in 2017 to address methane emissions from oil and gas facilities. And it has been shown since then to reduce fugitive and vented emissions from the oil and gas sector. It is currently going through the process of amending the regulation, and these amendments will be proposed to the CARB board later this month as well, so on June 22nd. And these board hearings are streamed if you would like to watch that. And so just some details of the amendments. They are being worked on to conform to some new federal EPA requirements, just to provide some general corrections and clarity in the language, and also to incorporate requirements based on satellite data that CARB expects to receive. And so just to expand a little bit more on that satellite data proposed amendment. So these proposed provisions would require operators to address leaks found by satellites. The operators would need to inspect facilities if notified of a leak by CARB, and then the leaks must be repaired within specified timeframes. And so CARB is still accepting public comments on all of these proposed amendments through June 12th. So almost a week left for that. And you can see the link to the public docket here. So, that can be found on our website and also on these slides here. So that concludes the presentation. I did want to point though to some resources and contact information. So you can find the link to our project webpage here. Also, if you just search on any search engine CARP snaps, it should pop up toward the top of your search. On that webpage, you can also subscribe and receive 2 email updates. So, you know, things like meeting dates can be found via these listserv emails. If you have any questions for us after this meeting, please reach out. We definitely want to hear as many recommendations and thoughts as we can. So you can email at snaps@arb.ca.gov or at the phone number here. Again, so that also includes if you have any questions or want to help, volunteer to host one of those air quality sensors, please reach out that way. And then as Dave showed earlier, we have now our online tool to report air quality or odor concerns, and that can be found via the link that we posted in the chat and this QR code. And then we also have phone lines in English and Spanish where you can report these as well if you don't have internet access. This is another way to report these air quality concerns. And with that, we will take any more questions they may have. I'll leave this contact information here, and I'll pass it off to Kathleen.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. We do have one question from Beverly in the chat. What about monitoring refineries in the East Bay? Is that, or will that be happening? And I'm going to throw that over to Ken.
Yeah, so right now, what we're focused on now is this monitoring down and near and on the Inglewood oil field, and in the communities surrounding it. And we're focused on oil and gas production. That's why we're near and on oil field. SNAPS has really not focused on refineries at this point. It could happen in the future, but right now it's not. That said, there are requirements now for fairly recently in the last 4 or 5 years for districts to set up community air monitoring near and downwind of refineries and to require fence line monitoring. So that's a statewide requirement, applies to all the air districts with refineries in them. So I would suggest contacting the Bay Area AQMD and asking about that program. We could also look into that too and circle back with you.
Okay, thanks, Ken. We have another question in the chat from Trent. Will the final report with input from OEHA and looking at current risk thresholds as put forth in AB 2588 present an HRA based on emissions from all ambient sources in the areas, not just oil field specific emissions as previous reports have? Trent, I'm not quite sure what you're referring to in the previous reports, but Heather can certainly answer the question regarding the HRA. Heather?
Yeah, thanks, Trent. So we will be looking at cumulative risk from all sources based on what's measured in the air, in addition to using the source apportionment results to try to distinguish various sources within that cumulative risk.
Thanks, Heather. All right, I don't see any hands raised at this time or additional questions in the chat. Jonathan?
Yes, I just wanted to leave the space open for just another 30 seconds or so to make sure that we don't have any other questions before we close out.
I'll also be putting, while folks are thinking about other questions, I'll be putting shortly a link to the fence line monitoring in the chat as well.
All right, well, in that case, thank you all so much for being here today and participating in this meeting. You know, we really do appreciate all the recommendations that we receive. It, you know, does improve our program, and we want to continue improving the SNAPS program. So, you know, there will be more meetings to come, more information with the quarterly updates. And if you all want to reach out, please go ahead, email us or call us, and we'll look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.